I think we are going to get started here, gang. Thank you all for being here today. Really excited to be here to talk kind of around business model canvassing for business pivots. So we're going to dive into some real life examples, some examples of some big name companies that we're all familiar with, and kind of how their business model canvases would look. And we'll do all of that kind of as we go forward. And just so you guys all know, we're going to have time between each section of the canvas that we're going to work on to do a little bit of work on our own. So the big thing to know kind of going forward is that as we're doing all of this and diving into the specifics, you're going to have some break times. You're going to have some times to get into your own situation. And I encourage you to do that. One of the things that I want this to be, though, is interactive. So please use the chat function to ask questions. Let's dive into specifics. I really want you guys to get as much out of this as possible. And so don't hesitate to interrupt me, to dive in, to allow us to get into this. And what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to give everybody the ability to talk. So you're more than welcome to just dive in, and I'm going to make everybody have the ability to talk. So now you're going to be able to unmute yourself at any point if you want to ask a question as we go forward and anything like that. So don't feel like you're going to throw me off or interrupt anything. If you have the question, somebody else probably does too. So with that being said, let's dive in. Get started here. So thank you all for coming again. Really excited to be part of this. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about who I am, the company I work for, Generator, how we got hooked up with the SBDC, all of those things here first, and then we'll kind of dive into the overall. So again, my name's Geoff Zentz. I have worked for Generator as the director for gBeta here in Indiana for the past year and a half. Before that, I was the director of client success for a company called UpNest, which is a Bay Area startup in the real estate space. And before that, I actually got the pleasure of being the director of customer happiness for One Click Ventures. And so through my customer experience and client success journey, everything that I've done has kind of been around looking at how does the client experience our company, our product, and what we do. And that has tied really well into what I do with Generator, which is work with early stage companies, whether that's startups or whether that's the Main Street businesses that we all rely on every day for our everyday life. And so what I'm able to do with that is work toward, how do we focus on the customer? How do we drive the customer experience to hopefully drive the outcomes for our company the best? And so one of the things that is really exciting about what I get to do with Generator is that Generator has all of these product arms. So Generator was founded in Wisconsin originally as a way to help high growth startups that are looking to potentially raise outside capital. So either venture capital investment, angel investment, things like that, to help them really refine their messaging and head down the path of getting that kind of investment. And throughout the course of our life cycle since 2012, when we were founded, we've also developed things like gBeta, which is what we run in Indiana, which is completely free to the companies that we help, all the way to OnRamp, which is our conference series, Project North, which is how we help corporations work toward their venture capital dreams and get them into the investing game, and also really help small business as a whole. And so that's really one of the most important parts of what we do. And to tell you a little bit about gBeta, just because I think it's helpful to understand what I do on a day-to-day basis, gBeta is a free 7-week program that we run for high growth, early stage startups. And we're trying to help them move down the path toward accelerating the growth of their company or raising outside capital. So we've run over 8 cohorts in Indiana of just gBeta. We've helped 45 companies. Those companies have gone on to create over 200 jobs for the state. They've raised over $20 million in follow-on financing for their company. And we're really excited that they just continue to grow. We haven't had a single company shut down yet. We continue to have them add product lines, and we even had one that got acquired, which we're really excited about. And as you can see, our big goal for gBeta is that they either end up in a full-blown accelerator or raise equity. And so it's completely free to the companies that we work with. We're lucky to have wonderful sponsors that make what we do possible. And that's how we're able to do it for free for companies. But one of the things that we all experienced, I think everybody probably on this call experienced, was that then COVID came along. So we had always traditionally helped those high growth startup type companies. But March of last year came along, and we realized really quickly that the companies that we traditionally helped had a really strong support group. A lot of them have investors, have mentors, and a network that can support them. But what we realized through the course of COVID coming along was that Main Street and small business, though we have great resources like the SBDC and the IEDC, they still didn't have the level of support that some of those high growth venture backable companies did. And so we, right alongside everybody else, pivoted and saw that others in the network needed help, and that we had the ability and the bandwidth to help those folks along. And so we partnered with, early last year, we partnered with the ISBDC to run a couple programs. The first of which was one that we called the Emergency Response Program. And this kicked off in early April. We did a weeks-long webinar series in which we brought in experts to talk about the EIDL loan, disaster loan program, the Paycheck Protection Program. We also dove into things like marketing your business, how to pivot in the midst of some adversity and some things like that. And that then grew into what we did last fall, which some of you may have been on, where we got to do a weekly webinar series where every Friday we got together to talk about different things, from customer service to mental health to taking care of your team, benefits, all of those things to really help small business get some advice and some support to move forward. And it was really impactful. And so I think this next slide, what you're going to see here, we did 14 of those sessions last fall. We had the emergency response programming that happened during the early part of the pandemic back in April. We also our team held small business office hours where we had over 600 one-to-one conversations with Indiana small businesses, from mechanics and auto shops to small goods stores, to hardware stores, to independent grocery stores. We sat down and had conversations with all of them to make sure that they had people that were guiding them the right direction, that they could ask questions that they needed to ask, and to really make a huge benefit to those companies. We also kicked off last fall our upskilling code school down in Bloomington, which was a first of its kind, where we took folks that were either unemployed at the current time or maybe underemployed, and they applied for that, got some soft skill training, were able to then interview for positions. We had 40 individuals go through that. We were really excited about that first ever upskilling code school that we ran in Bloomington. We plan on doing more of those. And so if that's something that you know anybody that's interested in, or you might be interested in, don't hesitate to reach out to me or one of our team. We're happy to talk a little bit more in depth about that. So I think that just kind of gives an idea before we hop into what you all are here to kind of hear from me about today. This seminar series is kind of the continuation of us partnering with the ISBDC to bring support to work through problems, to give some applicable things that can really move the needle for small businesses in our state. And we're really excited to be here, really excited to be tackling business pivots. Today, we're going to be talking about how to business model canvas for those business pivots. And so I'm going to take 1 second to take a breath to remind everybody again. We've had some more folks kind of pop in as we've gone along. This conversation today is meant to be more of a conversation. I want you guys to feel comfortable. I've made all of you that are here have the permissions to unmute yourself and ask questions. I really want to encourage us to have a conversation here. Let's get into the specifics. If you have specific use cases, if you have specific questions, please ask them, because we want this to be as beneficial and impactful as possible. So with that, I want to pause for a sec to see if anybody has any questions before we dive into the topic at hand. No questions is a good thing. So let's hop in. So first off, let's get into business model canvas. And there's a couple things we need to understand before we even get into this. So first, I always like to level set with what is a business model canvas. So to us, business model canvas is a strategic management tool that you use to develop new or document existing business models using a visual chart with elements that describe 4 main parts of your business. First, the value proposition. Second, infrastructure, or what things you have in place to handle or deliver your stuff. Third, customers. And fourth, finances. And so what you guys are going to see is that throughout this whole exercise is that there are different ways to look at this, but this is going to be a really customer/problem focused exercise. And we believe that it's the best way to really tackle something new, especially when you may be looking at, how do I pivot my business in the face of a pandemic? Or how do I find new sources of revenue and things like that? Breaking it down to these actionable yet tangible pieces really help you understand and make a educated decision on how you're going to move your business forward. So this is probably not a surprise to you, but here is a picture of the business model canvas, the traditional one. And so this is where we're going to start deviating already, is that this is the original business model canvas. It's been out for a really long time. And we're going to talk through both the traditional and the lean canvas. And then we'll talk about kind of the pros and cons between both. And so here you're going to see both models are going to have 9 boxes that we're going to work out of. So on this traditional business model canvas, you're going to see these 9 things: key activities, key resources, partner network, value proposition, customer segments, channels, customer relationships, cost structure, and revenue streams. We will dive into deeper what each one is, but just kind of going back here. So your key partners are going to be like, who are your suppliers? Who are your inputs? Who are the people that you're working with to make your product? The key activities are going to be more like, how do they, what does the value prop require in order for you to deliver your value proposition? Key resources are going to be like materials, logistics, some of those things. Value proposition, again, is going to be, what value are you bringing to your customer base? What problem are you solving, or how are you solving it? Customer relationships is obviously kind of how your customers expect you to develop and maintain a relationship with them. Customer segments are going to be a little bit more around like demographic, or if you have a specific target customer that you know you're going to resonate with, that's going to be in customer segments. Channels are going to be how you reach your customer base. So you might sell e-commerce. You might sell direct to consumer in store. You might be social media based. You might be on Etsy. Those are all channels that you're going to use. And then the bottom two are cost structure, which is all the costs that go into you fulfilling your value proposition. So we'll get into some specifics on this, but really it comes down to what are the overall costs for you to operate the business. And then finally, revenue streams, which is going to be how does money come into your business. As you're going to see here, those 9 things break down into the 4 things that we talked about at the beginning of the business model canvas. So key activities, key resources, and partner network all kind of flow into what we would consider infrastructure. Value proposition is more what we would call your offering. So that's what you're putting out into the world to sell, to offer to your customer base. Then you've got the customer side, which is customer segments, channels, and relationships. So those are all how you interact with your customers. And finally, that 4th piece that we talked about, cost structure and revenue streams. Now, all of these things go together to help us get a clear picture of what we're doing and how we're driving forward. And this is the traditional business model canvas. It's been around for a really long time. It's been something that we've used not only with our existing businesses that we've helped, whether it's small business or the high growth startups that we work with, but also we've used this. We run a program that's even earlier than gBeta. It's called gAlpha, obviously, hence the name. And gAlpha is actually, we use business model canvas exclusively to help entrepreneurial minded folks go from zero idea, like I don't even have a clue of what my business might be, to developing business model canvas and driving forward, and then hopefully eventually incorporating and moving forward with a full business. Now, the business model canvas side, I want to move forward into the lean canvas. And so what is the difference? What is the lean canvas versus the business model canvas? And so the lean canvas is an adapted version of the business model canvas that is specifically towards startups. And I also include in that pivots, because I think it's a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to understand. And I think it drives forward toward what we're trying to do a little bit better. And so the lean canvas focuses on addressing the broad customer problem and solutions and deliver them to the customer segments through that unique value prop. We're going to add unique to the value proposition thing. It's still the same thing on both canvases. It doesn't really change. And we'll dive into that here in a second. So I'm going to show you, this is very similar. It looks just like the regular business model canvas, but there are a couple things that have changed. And so we're going to go over this really quickly here. But so what you're looking at here is the lean model canvas. And I think from my world, I find that the lingo and the information that's given on this is a little bit clearer and a little bit easier to digest. And so I lean towards the lean model canvas, and I'll show you why. So first, you'll see underneath the ones that have been changed, what they are on the traditional business model canvas. So key activities on the traditional becomes problem. And so this is the first thing that I get jazzed about on the lean canvas, is that we are now going to define the problem that we're solving. I'm a big believer, as I said earlier, in the customer experience and how the customer's experience with our company drives our overall success. And I think that starts with clearly defining the problem that we are solving for our customer base. And so when it comes to us looking at, okay, we're going to make a pivot for our business. We're already in business. We're already doing some things, and we're going to drive into making a change or making an addition to our business model. I think understanding the problem is so paramount to how we're going to drive forward. And so by replacing key activities with problem, we are now going to outline what the issue is that we are looking to solve for our customer base. Second thing that changes, key resources becomes solution. So we go straight from problem to solution. And so here we're going to address the solutions for those individual problems. And I think, again, this just feels to me cleaner, easier to understand, and I think it moves the needle the most for most companies that I've worked with on this. Third thing that changes here is going to be partner network becomes key metrics. Again, we'll dig into this as we get into the lean canvas itself. But one of the most important pieces is you have to measure something. You can't just go out and take a stab at something and not have a way to measure it. And so I think key metrics is a more valuable piece here to identify than maybe a partner network may be. Unique value prop stays the same as we move forward. That's the same spot. As you can see, I'll go back a second. It's in the exact same spot right in the middle of the overall canvas. And so again, we need to know what we're delivering to our customers, how we're delivering it, and how it's working out. Customer segment stays the same because understanding the demographics and who we're trying to attract as a customer is hugely impactful as a whole for our business. Channels, again, same thing. It's really important to understand how are we reaching our customers? How are we selling to our customers? What places are we attracting and maintaining a customer relationship? What places may we be missing or can we leverage as something that's different for us? Customer relationships becomes, in the lean canvas, unfair advantage. And so we'll talk a little bit about this in a bit, but the unfair advantage really helps kind of drive forward what makes us unique, what makes us different than other folks out there, and what gives us the advantage to really capitalize where nobody else could. That's really important. And then the last two pieces, cost structure and revenue streams, stay exactly the same across the board because they're super important to your business. And it's really important that we understand where we're at with these. Here again, we're going to kind of break out. And as you see, the four major components of the business model canvas stays here. So not much changes other than the way we're looking at these and what we're defining in them, but problem, solution, and key metrics are still in that infrastructure piece. It's less about the infrastructure of how you deliver, but more about, do you understand the problem, solution, and how you're going to measure success across the board? Unique value prop is still your offering. Your customer-centric items are still your customer segments, your channels, and what makes you the unfair advantage. And then finally, the finances piece sits in the cost structure and revenue streams. So as a whole, those are the differences between the business model canvas, the traditional business model canvas versus the lean. Now, as I sit here, there are people on this call that I will almost guarantee you completely lean toward things on the traditional. And there are going to be people on this call that are leaning towards, pun intended, the lean one. Which one do you pick? Is there one that's better than the other? And the reality of the situation here is that there's no right or wrong answer. What we've learned over the course of our experience with small business is that it's really important that you go with whatever you find the most comfortable for you. Because if you're comfortable with it, it means you're going to work on it. It means you're going to really challenge yourself with it. And it's going to move the needle the most for your business. And at the end of the day, that's why we're all here. We are here talking about business pivoting and how to drive things and differences forward for your business because you want to be successful. And so, as with most things in business, there is best practices often, but there's no right or wrong answer. And there's nothing that says, if you don't do it this way, you're going to fail. The best thing that you can do is grab the one that's the most comfortable for you and use it to drive forward down this process. So today, to keep things as simple as possible, we're going to focus on the lean canvas. It's the one that we tend to lean on the most because especially when it comes to understanding problems, solution, unfair advantage, things like that. The lingo makes it simpler to understand and kind of leans us toward where we want to go. But the best part about that is everything we're going to learn applies to both. So you're going to be able to take all of the things that we kind of talk through, work on, and chat through to, if you feel more comfortable with the traditional business model canvas, you're going to be able to use that just as simply as possible here. So before we get into the why, we're about 30 minutes into this conversation at this point. I don't anticipate this taking the full 3 hours that we've got. So I want to quickly pause for a second, see if anybody's got any questions. And we're going to dig into some of the whys and hows next. But I also, Zoom meetings can be exhausting. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to take a little bit of a breather and move forward. So first, any questions that anybody has at the current moment? All right. Well, let's take 2 minutes. It's 10:28 right now. Let's take 2 minutes really quickly. Stand up and stretch. Take your eyes away from the computer for a second. We're going to get back at 10:30 and we will kick into the why and how of what we're doing. All right? Great. All right. We're going to stay on time. I promise. So let's hop back into it. I think one of the next things that comes up oftentimes when we're talking business model canvas is understanding kind of why are we even going through this process. And so it's really interesting. A lot of folks kind of, there are plenty of entrepreneurs that I work with that love business model canvassing. They would business model canvas everything they do with their business every time they do it. That's not necessarily needed, but it's one of the things that really can help kind of drive our decision making forward, especially when it comes to things like making pivots, changing what we're doing. It's really important that we kind of lay the groundwork so we are all on the same page, especially if you have teammates that are on your team. So everybody understands kind of where we're headed and why we're headed that direction. And so let's dive in really quickly to kind of the whys of why are we using business model canvassing instead of just, you know, kind of taking an educated guess or using our gut feel or just making a decision and going a direction. And so the first is we want to really draw out a picture of what the idea is. So if we're looking at changing our business model or adding a part of what we're doing as a pivot, we really want to understand as a whole how that will interact and affect what we're doing as a business currently, what new things it's going to bring to the table, all of those things. And And often if we just in a vacuum kind of go, oh, that's a cool idea, I want to try that out, we may end up overlooking or underestimating the complexity of what we're trying to do. And so the first thing is we're going to quickly draw that picture using the business model canvas. We also want to understand what the opportunities are. So one of the things that often happens in business model canvassing that I've found is that as you're sketching out problem solution and you're headed down the path of understanding something specific, what inevitably happens is you end up stumbling across either additional opportunities or other ways of delivering what you're doing that moves the needle for your customers, which ultimately moves the needle for your business. And so by taking the time to sketch this out, you really are able to understand what those opportunities may be. The next thing is, I'm going to tell you right now, is super controversial. So don't throw stones at me here, but it allows you to kind of create a business model without going through the laborious exercise of creating a business plan. So I know probably everybody on this call has probably previously made a business plan. It's typically a really involved document. It probably even sits in a binder somewhere in your office or on your desk. And it's normally a really involved and detailed plan for what the business is going to do. One of the things that we, especially when it comes to looking at things like business pivoting or starting up a new idea, one of the things that we often coach entrepreneurs around is there's a time and a place for a business plan, but often really early in an idea or really early in a company, it can be kind of a waste of time, because not that it's not valuable. The exercise is 100% valuable, but it also can be very daunting and very, well, like I said here, laborious. And so you end up spending a ton of time on something that quickly becomes out of date, quickly becomes not as relevant as you intended for it to be. And so what we tend to use is using the business model or the lean canvas. It will allow you to kind of go through those check boxes of what a business plan is doing at a more high level viewpoint that then allows you to make those decisions, walk through those important pieces, but not have to devote the amount of time and effort into it that you would a traditional business plan. Again, let me make sure, especially for my ISBDC and IEDC folks, a business plan is super important for a business, but it's not always necessary to get that detailed. And one of the things that we use business model canvassing for is to check off the boxes of a lot of what the business model or the business plans do without having to get that deep into detail. And then it allows clear understanding of the idea and how to execute. So you're going to quickly, by going through the business model canvas, you're going to be able to get a clear understanding of what's the problem, what's the solution, what's the value that our customer is getting out of it, who's the customer that's going to get the value out of it, how much does it cost, where's the revenue going to come from. Those types of things are a quick yet clear glimpse. Words are hard today. A quick and clear glimpse of the idea and how to execute, and then you're going to be able to move forward and get going into that idea. And so those things are really important, and it's just a really simple way of getting there. Now, how do we use this thing? So Geoff, you've shown me these great graphs on a piece of paper. What the heck am I supposed to do with that? So here again is the lean canvas. You guys will see at the bottom here a link, and feel free, if you don't have this already, to either, I'm not sure you can copy off of this, but I will pop it into the chat. The lean canvas that you can go download, so you have a copy of it. But it's really important to understand kind of how we're going to use this and how you can use it. And so, again, I put in the chat the link down at the bottom, but it's a great resource to pull this. So first, and I don't mean to be Mr. Obvious here, but you fill out the answers to each section of the canvas. So the first thing you do is you go through, and we're going to actually go through in the order that I would recommend you going through, I think it kind of walks you through the whole process as it goes. But then also it's going to allow you to use it in a way that makes sense and kind of drives you to the next section. We always encourage either literally print out the canvas itself and write directly on, or use sticky notes. In a pinch though, like today, you may not have the ability to print this out. Many of us are working from home, and printers are definitely not something that all of us have anymore, including me. But you can take each section and just use a Google Doc, or you can do it in a one other place that I've always found is you can do it in PowerPoint, or you can do in Google Slides, or whatever you might use for that. You'll be able to use each section. One thing that I think people often, especially if you don't use the actual canvas, but it's really important that you do, is pay attention to the size of the boxes. They are literally meant to be the size they are to be constraining for what we're doing. This is really important because, as you'll see as we get into it, some of the boxes, we want them to be bigger because that's where our minds go. And so our minds want to give every solution for everything that goes on. And it specifically makes the solution box small because it wants us to be targeted and focused. And so even if you don't use the actual print out canvas and write in it, be aware of those box sizes are meant to keep us kind of constrained and focused as we go forward. Move quickly. So today we're not going to move as quickly, but this can be done in as little as 20 minutes from start to finish. This is not something that you want to agonize over. You should be able to clearly and concisely walk through the business model canvas or the lean canvas and get to a completed sketch of an idea really quickly. Now, I would say 20 minutes is probably pretty aggressive. You definitely can walk through it that fast, but from my experience, when you're lean model or business model canvassing, you're going to do it. Typically, I would sit down and probably have it done in an hour or two. Would be my normal time frame to really do a little bit of research, do a little bit of thinking, really work through everything in it. But it's not meant to, like we said earlier, it's not meant to be a full-on business plan that takes you a month to put together and get ready and really get all the details of. This is all more high level. How do we look at the problem we're trying to go towards or move towards, pivot, and head that direction? Does that all make sense to everybody? Great. I'll take that as a yes. So one quick note, and I just wanted to put this in here. So we are going to try to treat our business pivot. So we're gonna start going through each section of this. And if you have a business pivot, great. If you don't, let's just use your regular business. But what we can do is, as we're kind of moving forward, let's try to treat our business pivot or our business idea that we're going to work on here independent of our current business as much as possible. That may not be able to be completely independent, but one of the important pieces of what we're doing here is really trying to get an idea of, is the pivot that we want to make or may be making worth doing? And oftentimes it needs to be in addition to what is already going on in our business. Not often are we just completely foregoing what we've worked on for a long time and just making a complete right turn. Oftentimes they're going to work together no matter what. But we really want to understand if the pivot that we're considering doing, or if the addition that we're making to our business is going to be able to stand on its own in some aspect and not be a problem or take away from the original business. And so it's really going to help us to do that. Again, they're still always going to be somewhat interconnected, but I just wanted to make that one note before we kind of dive in. So that's all of my preface before we get started into the lean canvas here. Just as a quick reminder for everybody, I still see some folks coming in, going. Again, this is meant to be a conversation. And so what we're going to do going forward from this point is we're actually going to walk through each section of our business model canvas, the lean canvas that we're using today. And each section, we're going to talk through why we're going to work on it, what things we're looking to put in it. Then we're going to talk about some examples. So I've got 3 examples, and those 3 examples are from big name companies that we're all I think we're probably all really familiar with, but we're going to be looking at it from the lens of like them early starting out, what they were trying to accomplish and how they would have filled out their business model canvas. And then we'll actually have between each section, we're going to have 5 minutes between each section to sit down and dive into our own. And so what we're going to do is you'll have those 5 minutes. Please use that 5 minutes to sketch out your problem solutions, all of the sections that we're going to work through. And then there won't be, I will save you all of this. There won't be any sharing that's going to necessarily have happen. But if anybody wants to share, if anybody wants to ask questions, it's going to be a prime time to like dive into like, hey, I'm thinking about this is my problem, or this is my solution for that problem, or whatever that is. We're going to be able to hop into that. And I wholeheartedly hope we can have that as a conversation as we go forward. So with that, before we hop in, any questions? Anybody have anything they want to kind of dive a little deeper on or ask about? All right. Well, we'll continue on. I hope this is valuable. I hope you guys are enjoying this so far. We're really fortunate to be able to talk about business model canvassing. And so right here, I'm going to lay out the quote that is the reason that I love the lean canvas versus business model canvas, as we talked about earlier. But this right here is the reason that I tend to lean toward the lean canvas. And so most ideas fail, not because they fail to build what they set out to build, but because they waste time, money, and effort building the wrong problem. Now, obviously, Ash is the person who created the lean canvas. So of course, he is the person who believes in the lean canvas. And of course he would outline the problem, but that is right there. I think I might have a hand raised here. So let me, Jack, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can.
Yeah, I just kind of had a question about, you kind of answered it here a little bit, but I know Steve Blank is one of the creators of the business model canvas, and we're talking about the lean canvas today and how there's a connection. I was just wondering kind of, I guess, a historical origin, like how did the lean canvas, did it come out from what the original creators, or was it from another group that kind of adapted it?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Jack. So Ash Mora here is who actually adapted the original business model canvas. They were not connected to each other. But one of the things that I think Ash, from my study and reading into the lean versus the business model canvas, the things that I think as we've moved on kind of into a bit more of a, and this is, I think, why it's called the lean canvas, of that lean startup, lean decision-making process. I think our overall environment has kind of leaned, I'm going to keep using these horrible puns, has leaned that direction over time. And one of the things that always, so I've used the business model canvas. I'm kind of occasionally I'm a little bit of a Luddite. I like to stick with the traditional tried and true. But one of the things that often I found myself getting kind of tied up with on the traditional business model canvas was less about the actual like walking through the steps and more about like getting hung up on the intricacies of the lingo and what we were trying to define. And so Ash came along and said, hey, like this as a whole, the business model canvas is right on point as far as what we're trying, like how we're trying to head that direction. But he noticed that, at least in his opinion, the traditional business model canvas was less problem focused, less problem solution focused than it was more about like looking at the business itself. And he saw that if you didn't, in his experience, if you didn't define that problem and solution clearly, that you still, even doing the business model canvas, could end up in a situation where you hadn't gotten that clarity that comes from defining those things really early on, especially when you're making a new business or a business pivot. And so he just basically took pieces. He took the overall traditional business model canvas and said, what are the pieces of this that can be encompassed in some of those other things? So I think like customer relationships, that actually clearly can get defined in the customer segment or the channels section, and you still can capture that information. And replacing it with unfair advantage allows the user to really think through, you know, what is the differentiator? What puts me at a place where somebody isn't going to be able to easily copy me or knock off what I'm doing? And so he was able to kind of roll some of those other pieces into the business model canvas pieces that were saved or that he kept. And then it allowed him to dive deeper into things like problem and solution. And he actually has a quote that I read that somebody asked him in an interview, like, are you worried that the business model canvas and the lean canvas, both of them, are you worried that they're too customer focused? And he said he's not really worried about them being customer focused, as he's worried that people might see them being too problem focused. But truthfully, defining the problem is the thing that really sets businesses off and allows them to make the impact they're looking for, find the longevity, and head the right direction. And so he was kind of okay with that. And so that's kind of where it all comes from. They're not associated, but they absolutely are. They work together. And I think there are situations in which you would use the traditional versus the lean. But like I said earlier, I lean towards the lean just because it's a little bit easier to understand, a little bit more defined. And I think it helps everybody out headed that direction, especially early on. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wonderful question.
Thank you. I just want to kind of, I guess, make a comment with this.
Fire away.
So one of the hardest things with the business model canvas is that there's a learning curve to it. It takes time to learn it. You know, there's a book, there's like I threw out Steve Blank's name, like he has that one course that he does, and it's like, what, 20, 30 hours long and all this stuff. However, on the flip side, you know, when you talk about people always promoting the business plan, is that there's almost no type of learning curve to it. Like everybody's written an essay, everybody's kind of written stuff. And I think that's why a lot of, I don't know, that's why a lot of people still promote the business plan, even though the business model canvas can be good for what it is. I'm just wondering, now that I've said all that, where do you think the lean canvas sits in that spectrum, I guess you could say?
That and let me echo what you said, because I do agree with you. I think the business plan, and I think that's why you often see one of the cool parts about my job is I get to work a lot with some of the local universities and colleges. I get to come in and talk about things. And I actually think that is a really astute point that you make, Jack, is that I think the business plan as a whole is probably the most accessible of the options out there. because there is very little learning curve. And we'll even get to the end of this today, and we're going to sketch out business model canvas. And what tends to be less clear in either the business model canvas or lean canvas at the end is, okay, where do I go now? I've done this, like what's next? Whereas a business plan kind of can set you even a little bit further down the path. But what I think, what we've learned over the course of time, kind of working through business model canvassing and lean canvassing, is that I think business model canvas and lean canvas kind of work in the same area. Like it's that, it's exactly what we're talking about today. Like a lot of us probably already have businesses. We're already moving in a specific way, but you know, we've experienced COVID over the last year, or we're experiencing either a downturn or our customer base asking for something else, and we're not really sure where to go. This, I think for me, once you get kind of the business model canvas or lean canvas 101 underneath your belt, once you start understanding how to use it, how to help make the decision making and move forward, I think what it does is it allows you to kind of move through those steps in a quicker pace and get out there. And one of the things that we talk a lot about with startups and entrepreneurs in general is like you are going to, you'll spend a lot of time thinking about things, but you will learn 10 times the amount of information when you go out and get in front of your customers and try to start selling it. And so what we think is the business model canvas and lean canvas allows us to somewhat expedite that process and work through kind of the big rocks of an idea or the big rocks of a pivot and really identify, okay, well, like we'll even get into today, like cost structure. We're not going to actually get into like what's my cost of goods sold or how much, like we need to understand that and there's a place for it in another world. But what we're going to be looking at here is less about like how much is the dollar amount that things are going to change, but more just, you know, is there going to be developer talent that goes into this? Or do I have to develop a new product? Or do I need to engineer something? Do I need to buy new? So we take a high level look at, okay, where are the costs going to come in here? And then we can go figure out the specifics after this. But this gives us an idea of, okay, this is going to add these things, or this is going to change these things. And I can get a quick idea of that still seems feasible. Let's go move forward and test this and get out there. This lean canvassing really allows us to expedite that and get headed that direction a lot faster. And speed to market and getting out to your customers, you're going to learn 10 times the amount of things you're going to learn than sitting in a room working on an overall business plan that could take you a significant amount of time and head that direction. And so that's where we think it kind of falls in, is it's an important exercise, and there will be a lot of you may even go from this pivot exercise where we're going to just sketch out the lean canvas to literally going, hey, there's a full, like we should really move forward into a full business plan and really get some specifics and flesh this completely out. This is a great low impact way of doing that to head that direction. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's awesome. Jack, thank you so much for those questions and those comments too. I think it's really valuable to understand. And again, I want to make sure you guys all know, I think there's a time and a place for a business plan. And I agree with Jack wholeheartedly. It is a little bit more, everybody can write and kind of has experience with writing an essay. A lot of us probably in school, college, high school, may even have had experience with fleshing out a business plan. Like those things are really valuable. And this conversation is not meant to dissuade us from doing those exercises. This is just a way of being a little bit leaner, a little bit quicker, and getting something fleshed out that can get us to testing quicker, so then we can really start getting some learnings in. So, great. Let's hop into the problem. Again, just like Jack just did, please interrupt me, ask questions. That's what this is for. That's what's going to make this fun for all of us. But we're going to dive into the problem section here, which is the first. So the problem, if you're imagining, let's go back real quick. Problem section is our big full section on the left. It's got the problem at the top, and then it's got existing alternatives. We're going to talk through both of those. But again, this is meant to be a big box. I'm going to tell you this right now because I'm just thinking of it, and so I'm going to call myself out. I didn't put this between each section. So if you need my help to go back to the full business model canvas, don't hesitate to pop in or send me a note and say, hey, can we go back to the full one just to remember? But again, the size of the box also helps. The problem should be the biggest side. And so the first thing about the problem is we're going to be trying to find clarity and understanding of the problem because we think that that is key to execution. Now, that is not meant to confuse you into thinking that it has to be complex. You're going to see in my examples from the companies that the big companies that we're going to talk about, that most of them are like one sentence in this problem box, even though the box is really big. And so you may outline more than one problem here that you're going to solve, but really defining it down to getting some clarity around it is really important to how we're going to be able to move forward with the rest of the business model canvas. It also kind of sets the baseline, and this is why we start with the problem. There are going to be situations where you don't start with the problem. They're going to be rarer. Like sometimes you may have a value prop that you'll start with and you kind of work your way around. But at the end of the day, the problem should be really early in your lean canvassing because it's going to set the baseline for where everything else goes from here. And that really makes the big impact that you're trying to make as a whole. Also, articulating the clear problem increases the likelihood of success. So we are all leaders in our organizations, whether that's you're the business owner, you might be a department head, you might be whatever that may be. And one of the most impactful things you can do for your business and for your team is be able to clearly articulate what the problem that we're solving is, because again, like number two, it sets the baseline across the board for everybody else that's going to touch the problem. More than likely, a lot of you are not going to be the only person, even if you are the one who business model or lean canvases, you are not going to be the only person that ends up developing the solution as a whole. And so you've got to be able to clearly communicate with your team, with your developers, with whoever it is that's going to help you execute what the problem that we're solving for is, so it can really allow us to be targeted and head towards the right solution. So we're going to start by listing the problem or problems that we're trying to solve. Again, we want to be as targeted as possible. If you are writing down 4 problems that you're solving, we probably are getting a little bit too wide here. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but as you're going to see in the examples that we're going to give, one general example, one general problem was enough to get all 3 of these huge companies off the ground and headed the right direction. Even if they change later, it's going to be the baseline. Try to outline that main point or issue that you're building around. So one thing that I'm always constantly really focused on is what are we boiling it down to? What is the pain point that our customer feels that we are solving? And if we can get it to that simple of a thought, we're going to be really successful. This one, I put it in here because I am guilty as all get out about this, especially when it comes to the problem, because being the customer-minded, customer-centric person that I am, I instantly want to go and start getting solutions. And I will even sometimes start outlining the solution in my problem section. And so I put this in here because if any of you are like me, you're always so dialed into your customer or who you're working with that you are going to feel the need to start outlining solutions. Don't. We're going to get to that. It's going to be our next section, but it's a constant fallback on it. Juliana, did you have a question for me?
Yeah, hi. I was just kind of wondering, what do you do kind of with the laundry list? Because I find that in working with people through like a problem statement, there's a tendency to just make like a huge list of like, oh, it's going to fix all of these things for them.
Yep.
And I know a lot of that comes out in like customer discovery of like figuring out which one really is the most important. But do you have a way like to help them kind of prioritize prior to that step?
So that's a great question. And if I'm working with a company that has that, because man, we definitely do on a regular basis. One of the things that I try to do even before that, or if I find that we're sketching out like 5 or 6 problems, the first thing I'm going to try to do is see if I can start bucketing them together. I think oftentimes with a and we'll see here in the examples, but sometimes you can even take the problems or the things that they're outlining, and they actually, if you really take a third party look, you can bucket them together into one problem. So that's the first thing I think about is how can I combine these, or do these go back even one level further that we may not be thinking about? So that's the first. The second that I have done, it can be frustrating. So let me also say this, is that let's say I can't get them to bucket together, or we can't boil them down to a singular or 1 or 2 problems, is we'll actually have multiple canvases. So we'll actually dive into each problem on a separate canvas. That can get a little daunting, and it definitely, if you're like me, who typically I'm not doing it for my own company, I'm helping others do it, it can be a little frustrating when I'm like, hey, here's 5 canvases because you have 5 problems that you wanted to solve. Let's go work on them. You can do them all on the same canvas if you want, but I find that it really helps clarify things, and it helps drive you forward toward, we as entrepreneurs tend to say, my problem can solve, I can solve this problem for everybody in the world, or these problems need to be solved and we can do it. And I think that's great, but also you can't do it all at once. And so if you break them out, and what I've done in those rare situations where I have everybody do, or somebody do multiple canvases, is we quickly determine, hey, this is the most pressing one. This is the one we can make the quickest impact on and get rolling on right now. And then these other ones we'll work on at a later date down the road. And often when you're presented with that, somebody's able to figure that out, and really it helps focus, even though you've kind of created more work for them in the short term.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's
Thank
helpful.
you. Great question. So one thing that I wanted to call out here too is that in this problem box, we have the problem on the top, but then you guys saw kind of in the middle of the box, there was list existing alternatives. So we don't really dive into, and you guys will see this in the canvas itself, but we don't really dive into competitors. That's not really something we're all that concerned about here. Like, we do look at like, what are the unfair advantage, what are our unique value props? So we do need to be aware of them, but this is a good spot that we're gonna actually outline. If you know of existing alternatives to the problem that that you want to work on, you're going to just jot them out here. Again, this is not meant to be super detailed, but it allows you to be conscious of who else is in the space, who else is doing something similar. And it also allows you to start focusing on, okay, what are they doing that they may be missing that we could capitalize on? It's an important piece of the process, but it's also like, it's not like a must have. It's just something that if you know them, you can run with them here. So I told you we were going to have 3 examples of big companies that, and we're going to show what their business model canvases would look like. So here you go. We're going to outline Google, Facebook, and Amazon. I want you all to keep in mind, though, that all 3 of these business model canvases are done from the point of early in the company's history. We're not talking about the Amazon and the Facebook and the Google that we know today. We're talking about what was their first thing, and where did they start from? Because I think it helps us see where it boiled down to the very beginning. And so, again, let's look at the Google problem right off the bat. Google's problem that they identified early on was that there's irrelevant search results of existing search engines. So what they were experiencing was you go out to, here are existing alternatives. So you go out to Alta Vista, which I love Alta Vista because it makes me think of Parks and Rec. You go out to Alta Vista, you search something, and you're getting irrelevant search results that don't really have anything to do with what you're searching for. And so the problem that they identified is that it's just hard to find what you're searching the web for. They show their existing alternatives of Alta Vista, Yahoo, and Excite at the time. Those were the big players in the game that were doing something similar. But they still noticed that in spite of those existing alternatives, that people were having that problem. And so the problem was still left wide open to go after. Now, moving to Facebook, Facebook's problem was Harvard University's online network is very limited in functionality and not fun, and students want a solution to communicate online. So they identified that Harvard already had an online network, but it was not working for the students. It was not doing what the students wanted it to do. And that students were looking for a way to communicate online. Existing alternatives that they identified at the time were MySpace, which was huge at the moment. High Five and Friendster were the 3 big existing alternatives. One that I would call out that I probably would have put in existing alternatives, even though this might date me a little bit, but especially with looking at the second section of their problem, is I probably would have included like AOL Instant Messenger. I know this was at the end of that whole like online communication through that platform. It definitely had died off a lot at that point, but it still was an alternative that was in the market. And then finally, let's take a quick look at Amazon. Amazon's problem at the time was that there was a lack of online bookstores. And it was hard to select books in offline stores. So there was no rating, recommendations, hard to find a book. You were limited to what was ever in store. And all of those things were really difficult at the time. And the existing alternatives were Interlock, local booksellers, and then Barnes & Noble was the biggest of the big at that point. So here you can see how really basic and well-defined the problems were. They didn't have a solution for them at this point. Like, we're not outlining those things. All we're doing is saying, here's the problem that we know our customers are having, and what we think we want to start working toward. And here are the existing alternatives in the market. Does anybody have any questions about that? Any thoughts, confusion, anything that can be helpful here? We're getting ready to, we're going to take a 5-minute break here to, one, allow you to jot down your answers to problem and existing alternatives, but then also to stretch your legs a little bit, maybe get a refill on coffee. So anybody have anything before we dive into it? Jack, fire away.
So the examples that you gave, obviously, big monolithic companies. Can you give an example of maybe something that is relevant, but maybe a little more, I don't know, a little smaller for us? Maybe something that we're familiar, a company that we're familiar with, but isn't, an industry monopoly at this point?
Sure, I totally understand that. So let's, I'll just throw one Indianapolis related, though they've become a monopoly, or pretty darn close. But let's think back to Exact Target. Let's go there. So Exact Target was email communication, email marketing. That at the time there wasn't a big player in the market. It was one of those things that they didn't have a method. So one of the things that sorry, I just saw Juliana's message there. So one thing that I wanted to, and so I totally understand that looking at these big ones, but what we're trying to understand is that not trying to make this more difficult, but like with an Exact Target, they saw an opportunity to help marketers be more targeted in how they got to or reach their customers, and email was a way to do that. And so if you look at somebody like Exact Target, their problem was that email marketers didn't have a targeted way of reaching their clientele at the time. And so that would literally be what they'd put out. Let's think about, does anybody have, let me throw it back to you guys. Do you guys have a business or an idea that you're kind of, or a problem that you're thinking about or poking on at the current moment that you may not know about, or that you may not be sure if it's the right thing to head toward? So let's think about, Juliana put out there, it's harder to work with small local-based businesses like an insurance agency or a new restaurant. Okay, so let's think about, let's just take a new restaurant for an example. So if the restaurant is coming out, you're going to sit down with them to business model canvas. And so their problem may be that maybe there aren't restaurants in their area, or maybe there's not a specific type of restaurant in their area. It's boiling it down to, like, what problem are they coming into the market to solve? And so even though these three are huge conglomerates at this point and are way above anything that any of us are going to work with, what I was trying to illustrate here, and maybe I've just missed my opportunity, I was trying to illustrate that they all boil down to, like, even though Amazon now is the largest everything in the world, they didn't start as trying to be the largest everything in the world. They started as, there's a lack of online bookstores. And so I want to create a bookstore, like an online bookstore. That's it. And so even though these examples are huge companies at this point, they still boil down to that one thing. And so that restaurant needs to be able to boil it down to, what's the problem I'm solving? Is it, we don't have healthy food in this area, so I'm going to be a healthy alternative to the fast food shop? Is it, you know, we don't have affordable donuts, so I'm going to have affordable donuts available here. We've got to help get everybody to the point where they can boil it down to, what's the thing, why are we doing what we're doing? So if we're a business, what problem are we solving? If we're pivoting our business, what's the new problem that we're solving, or what's the new thing that we're doing? It all can boil down to that one thing. Does that help? Or am I still missing?
Yeah, I think it works. I think it's, I don't know, just, I guess for me, it's with these examples, Google, Facebook, Amazon, I mean, while you have boiled them down to a singular problem that they started out with, now, you know, they solve every single problem. I mean, you know, the problem with Facebook is that any problem that Facebook is solving is because it's a problem they haven't solved yet. And same thing with, you know, Google, like, any problem that they're solving now is just something that they haven't tried to solve, and just all this stuff. So I guess trying to figure out, boiling it down to something a little more, I guess, tangible for more realistic business models that we're looking at.
For sure. And and the one thing that, like, we are, even with these 3 examples, which are going to continue throughout the presentation, they're not looking at the business today. Like, we're looking at these 3 businesses, like, at the stage in their company that all the businesses that we're currently working with, or most of us are working with, which is, like, they're not at that level. The hope is to try to illustrate how them solving one singular problem early on allowed them to develop into, and we're not going to get into it, we're not going to even talk about, like, Facebook's all going to be geared around being Harvard University's social networking tool. Amazon is all going to be geared around the bookstore. Google is only going to be the Google engine. It's not going to be, and so hopefully, as we move forward, we're going to be able to take these huge conglomerates that we're all really focused and familiar with, and show how it's still all boiled down to the same work that we're all trying to do for either our clients or for our own business going forward. And so that's great. And if you have specifics like Juliana gave, like, that's helpful, because if you're working with, or you are a restaurateur that you are going into an area and you don't have an answer for what problem am I solving, like, I guess at a high level, you're solving an option to feed hungry people, but that kind of, and we'll get into the differentiator side of it as we go forward, but just that problem alone is not really solving it is solving a problem, but it's not solving a problem that is really a problem, because there are tons of restaurants out there. And so if you're just, hey, we're going to feed people, that's probably not a good reason to put it as a problem that you're solving in the business model canvas. And so therefore, I would be encouraging you, and we would be working through, like, what is the differentiator? What are you a vegan vegetarian restaurant? Are you, what is the thing that you're solving? Because like Amazon now is everything, but really it all boils down to, there weren't online bookstores and it's hard to find books. And so they decided that they were going to come out of the market as an online bookstore, and it developed into something way bigger and way crazier, but it still all boiled down to, that was the problem they were solving for people. And then they saw that it could expand into other markets, and they added lines and pivoted, but it still all boils down to, I see a problem, people can't buy books online, and it's hard to find rare books or the specific books I'm looking for. And so Amazon said, hey, I can fix that. I'm going to throw up a website and we're going to sell books. That's all we're going to do. And that's where it starts. And that's where a lot of us are today. So that, hopefully that helps. Are there other questions? Anything else that we can dig into there? Thank you guys.
This is Julie, and I just wanted to say, that's like a helpful discussion to have about it, because there's so many good examples like Google and Amazon and Facebook, right? Like, where you can find tons of stuff about them as case studies online to share with clients. But I find that, like, working with these small local businesses, like making that pivot to working with small local businesses, I'm at a state where probably I need to, like, develop good examples of other local small businesses, right? So that it feels more tangible for them. Sure. Because a lot of times the answer does become, because I want to open a restaurant, right? Because I want to make food for people, right? Or because I passed the test and I can be an insurance agent, right? So So, you know, a lot of times I feel like the discussion leads more to, is there space in the market? Like, is there room for just another insurance agent, or are you doing something different that they, you know, that the existing ones aren't doing, or something like that? So the problem piece, yeah, just becomes a little bit more of a challenge, and having good examples for them. They aren't readily available now. So, you know, thinking about creating what those might look like.
Yeah, I think that's really, really a good call out, and I'll do some digging. So we do a lot of business model canvassing with our folks, but I didn't think far enough ahead that would be a valuable piece here. I was a little short-sighted, I think, in my thought that these companies at an early stage would be helpful, but I totally understand that actual small business examples would be even more valuable, and so I'll see what I can't do as far as digging up some examples that may help all of you out. That may be a little bit more what you're working with or what your business looks like at the current moment.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Sure. All right, gang. Any other questions, any thoughts before we take 5 here and hop into the problem section? Okay. You've got a timer up on your screen. I'm going to get it started here. Take 5 minutes. If you're working through one, feel free to fill that section out that you're working on. If you need a break, take this 5 minutes for a break. We'll come back and we'll hop into the solution section next. And if anybody has any questions, I'm going to turn my video off, but I will still be here. So if you have questions and want to hop through the chat, feel free to message me if you have specific examples you want to go. All right, we'll be back here shortly. All right, gang, it is time to get back into it. We'll probably make these next ones, those next breaks that we've got these built in after each one. We'll probably make them a little bit shorter as we go forward, just to make sure that everybody has time to eat lunch and all of those things. So next up, well, first, any questions about the problem side? Great discussion. I really appreciate everybody taking part, and your comments towards me on helping get some other examples. I will be working on that. So, but I just wanted to make sure we took a second. If anybody wanted to share and had any questions about the problem side before we hop into solution. All right, I will take the silence as agreement. So solutions next. So we're going to literally draw a one-to-one line from each problem or the singular problem that we've defined to a solution. This is the place that we're going to really be thinking minimum viable product. So if you haven't or don't have experience with an MVP or haven't done that before, we're going to be thinking about like the lowest common denominator to get a product to market. So even if it is, you know, I want to build a website for this thing or this idea, maybe the first is, instead of like hiring a developer and going through all that, maybe our first thing is just like using Shopify or using WordPress or one of the off-the-shelf folks. If we're not web developers ourselves, we're looking for the quickest and easiest thing that we can get into the market. MVP is really key here because you can get bogged down in the details if you're not careful. And so those are the first two things. And this is one of the places that the small box is on the canvas for a reason. So if you're thinking through, and we'll show it here in a second, but the problem box is really big. The solutions box is one of the smallest boxes on the whole thing. That's for a really specific reason, is because we as entrepreneurial minded folks, we can find a solution for everything. We can run wild with it. We can get crazy and really go to town as far as the solution goes. We can constantly be finding things that are really like versions of a solution, or we might find pieces of it or whatever that is. And so the box itself is specifically meant to help constrain us. And this is one of the places where if you're not using the full solution here, or the full lean model canvas, that you're not actually writing on it, this is where you have to be really careful, because that box is meant to hold you in and make sure that you are doing exactly what, being focused and being targeted about what you're doing. So let's hop into the solutions for our three huge companies that we're working with here. So the solution for Google, if you remember right, our problems that they defined were that it's hard to find things that we were searching for, and search results were not bringing up anything relevant, or we're not bringing the most relevant things up. And so their solution that they're identifying here is develop a technology that would allow users to search and find relevant content. You'll notice here that it's not telling us how they're going to develop that technology. It's not telling us what the technology is. And again, as entrepreneurial minded folks, we tend to dive straight into the weeds. We know what algorithms we're going to use. We know how we're going to do it. All of those things, like we already have a vision for that. We're headed down that path. And the truth is, this business model canvas, we should be thinking of more from a high level of what we're doing. And so back out of the weeds and just tell us what the solution will be. And so with Google, we're just going to develop a technology that would allow users to search and find relevant content. I know that seems really simplistic, but at the end of the day, the Google search is nothing but that. There's a lot more that they've gone into it, and we're going to get into some of those differentiators and some of the things that we're bringing to our customer. But that really is, at the end of the day, the end of it. For Facebook, let's talk about the Facebook solution. So we identified earlier that the Harvard student portal was not doing the job of connecting students, and that students wanted a way to be able to communicate with each other. And so our solution that we came up with for Facebook, and remember, this is early Facebook, is online communication for Harvard students with a possibility to connect with friends, share photos, interests, chat, and other stuff. Like literally, I love this one because it says other stuff. We don't know. We think there's probably some other stuff in there that can be done. So we wrote it down. But at the end of the day, the only thing that we were building for was the solution to the original problem that we identified, which was we want Harvard students to be able to connect with friends and communicate. Those are the two things that we saw as opportunities. They did get a little bit more in the weeds as far as share photos and interests, but it still was a very high level solution to the problem. And then finally, Amazon doesn't get any more straightforward with this. The Amazon example to me is the one that I kind of geek out about because it's as simple as build an online bookstore with millions of titles. Like, yeah, millions of titles is quite a daunting number, but it's as simple as building an online bookstore. So these three examples are no-brainers. Let's go back to Juliana's question, and we're going to stick with the restaurant one because I think it's a little bit more simple. But let's talk about our restaurant that we're talking about. That's just a sole proprietor restaurant that we were working with. Not a chain, nothing like that, but we want to open a restaurant. And so let's say our problem was that there were no Southern style food restaurants. So like good fried chicken, mashed potatoes, things like that. So there's no that's maybe soul food or Southern food did not have a restaurant in the area. And so we identified that as a problem that we could fill. And so what's our solution? A Southern food restaurant. That's really as simple as it needs to get at that point. We'll figure out all the other stuff as we go forward. But if that's the problem that we identified, then that's where the one-to-one problem and then solution, and the solution to that problem kind of comes from. And the same thing, maybe if there are an insurance agent that that is wanting to go through the business model canvas exercise, like just draw that solution directly back to whatever problem that you identified. And I would say go as far as encouraging back to the problem for a second, encouraging them to really be targeted on that problem. Like, just being another insurance agent in a sea of insurance agents is not really, like, just because you got certified may not be the greatest business decision you make. But if you can help them find that, like, maybe what do you know that there's a niche for, or what can you specialize in? Where can you really add value for your community, for your area, for whatever that may be? There's always typically a way that we can find a problem that then we can be the solution for. Any questions on that solution side? It's pretty straightforward, but yeah, anything on you guys' end before we move on? I'm going to actually skip the next timer section just because this section was really quick. They get a little bit quicker as we go forward. So, all right. Key metrics. So the key metrics section will be the next one. It's right below the solution section. And remember, all three of these kind of tie back to that infrastructure overall thought. Okay. And so This is one where key metrics can be tough. It's something that even can be changing as you go forward, but it's really important that you help either the folks you're working with or your business understand what those key metrics are to be able to measure and determine what long-term success for either the test that you're going to do or the idea that you're going to be moving into, or as a whole, the business in general. And this is one place that most of the companies that we work with, they really struggle because a lot of them aren't even sure what the metrics are that they should be measuring. And so this is one of the places that I think takes the most brain power of putting together the lean canvas. But I think really putting the effort and time and thought process into these key metrics makes a huge difference as we move forward into testing and driving things forward. So select metrics that actually matter to the desired outcomes. Man, this is a hard one. I'll be the first to tell you that finding those metrics as a whole can be so difficult to how they move the needle for the desired outcomes. But most of the time, what we encourage folks to do is look at, if you're looking at a business pivot or you're looking at a business idea, what do you envision as long-term success? What are your thoughts of whether that's, being, some folks may just be being revenue positive. It could be, having a positive EBITDA, or it could be a whole slew of different things that may be what they consider long-term success. But we would encourage looking at whatever that is as their marker of long-term success, and then starting to work backwards toward, okay, what are the things that are going to determine whether that success happens? And so we'll get into specific examples here in a second, but really make sure that the metrics that we're picking actually matter to what we're doing. It's really important. Find metrics that drive value for the company idea. And I forgot one here, but maybe even the customer. So those metrics that are going to drive value are going to be things that really help. And so what I mean by drive value is, either, it could be cost of customer acquisition, or it could be, driving the marketing budget. You might have a return on investment on your marketing budget. That may be something that really drives value, because the more return on investment you get for your marketing budget, the more it makes sense to be able to outlay that expense in order to get more revenue. And so your ROI may be really through the roof. And if you can do that, that's one that's driving value for the company. Maybe in a different world, maybe it's driving down the cost of your goods. So we talk about COGS a lot in working with companies that I work with. Maybe a metric that drives value for your company is driving down the cost of the goods that you're selling. That may be a metric that moves the needle for the company, and it may be something in what you're building that will help you determine the success of whatever we're working on, whether that's a pivot or just the overall business as a whole. This is one that is really easy to fall trap to. Be cautious of vanity metrics. So I've worked with some companies that are very heavily web or app based. One of the most common vanity metrics in the world is users. This is really counterintuitive, but let's say we are building out a website that let's say we're a brick and mortar shop that has been around for years, but because of COVID, we're deciding to pivot into at least having an online presence. We've never had one before. But one of the things that may be a vanity metric is how many users come to your website. If they're not buying anything, and if you are paying for advertising and web advertising, and they're just coming to the website and not converting into a customer, that may be a vanity metric. I'm not saying that it is, but it could be, because they're not moving that needle for the overall company. And it's so easy to do, because you know what? When you see 1,000 customers or 1,000 unique viewers head to your webpage, it's really exciting. But be sure you're measuring things that could move the needle. And so if those 1,000 customers equal 0 sales, it's probably a vanity metric. And so be very careful of those things. This is more of a call out than anything, but if you are not keeping metrics or if you don't have key metrics to determine successes for anything you're doing, whether that's just regular business or if you're talking about pivoting or adding something to your business through this whole experience, you have to measure something. You can't just do it and hope it works out. For one, you may be hurting your business if you're not measuring metrics to determine those successes. And you've got to have a way of knowing whether or not you do it or you continue to do it or you don't. This is a tough one, but I think it's really important that we understand as a whole that you've got to be able to measure things that matter so you can determine whether or not it's a success or not. And what metrics allow us to do is take a relatively unbiased look at what we're doing in a way that the metrics tell us what's going on rather than us just try to assess whether something's successful or fails on its own. I have to be quite honest here. This has been something over the course of my career that's been a hard learn, but it's so key. I'm a gut feel type of person. A lot of times I get into something and I'm like, man, I just feel like this is the thing we should be doing. But what I've learned over the course of time is that metrics, finding key metrics and using them to help determine what it does is it either backs up my gut feeling or it tells me my gut feeling is wrong in a way that I can go, you know what, the data just doesn't show that this is the right thing to do. And so that's a really key thing. It's a little bit harder in practice, but if you can get to the point that you're measuring things that are important to the business and the success of your idea, you're going to be so much better off in the long run. And the last piece here is, though you can choose to measure a lot, just about everything in a business can be measured. But our key metrics here are the things that we are going to focus on because they're the things that truly move the needle for the business. And so just like we talked about a second ago, users, we can measure users, we can measure people that show up on our website, but if we are focusing on them and not understanding that our conversion rate is bad or that we're not actually getting customers to buy, then we are focusing on the wrong thing and therefore not helping our business in the long run. And so these key metrics are really meant to kind of drive that focus again and head us in the right direction. So let's talk about key metrics for our three behemoths here when they were still baby companies. So Google identified that the key metrics for their infrastructure of going with developing a search engine that gave good and relevant results their key metrics were the number of search requests total. So they wanted to keep track of how many overall search requests were coming through. I would say that's a pretty good metric when it comes to your overall business is only about search engine results. And then the second thing was the percentage of users who end their search on the first page. So we all know now in the behemoth that Google has become that first page search results are so hugely beneficial for every other business that uses Google or that may pay for advertising on Google. So their two key metrics were around how many search requests were happening and then how many of their searchers stop after that first page that don't even click onto the second page of search results. Those were key metrics that they knew would drive the overall business success for them. Because if they did their job right and users stopped at the first page, it meant that people were finding what they wanted on that first search. Boom. Exactly what we wanted it to happen. Now, this is not a comment on what it's become, which is advertising heaven for advertisers. But this was their way of determining, were we moving the needle for our customers and actually solving the problem that we came up with? The Facebook one, so those who don't know what DAU, MAU is, it's daily active users, monthly active users. I don't have their North Star metric, so forgive me. This is Geoff fail here. But I don't know what that North Star metric was, other than the connection between, I'm assuming it was the connection between their customers. But daily active users and monthly active users is a great way for them to understand, are their customers, are the people that they're solving their problem for recurring to use their product? Because if their daily active users are trending upward versus their monthly active users, it shows that people are coming back every day to use the product, which shows that they're obviously finding use from it, and therefore they want to keep going. It's the reason that most of us log into Facebook every day, like daily active users. Like, there's probably nothing all that new going on Facebook. It's probably the same people giving the same updates, advertisers, all of that stuff, but yet we were called back to the platform every day. And it's because they know how to drive people back to the website and get that user base to continue. For Amazon, though, this is one that is really near and dear to my heart because I have a little bit of an e-commerce background. But key metrics here: website traffic. Again, it's a cautious thing. Website traffic is not always an indicator, but when they combine it with the next two things, I think it eliminates the fact that it could be a vanity metric, because the CAC is customer acquisition cost. So how much does it cost them in advertising dollars to get a customer, which means that they are tracking how does the website traffic then convert into a full-on customer. And then the next thing is return on investment, ROI. So sales conversion rate, revenue per visitor, percentage of shopping cart abandon rate. Anybody that's going to dive into the e-commerce side of the world, these are things that you will eventually become very, very acquainted with. But those individual pieces, the sales conversion rate, revenue per visitor, percentage of shopping cart abandoned rate, those all roll up into ROI. And so you can early on just track ROI to understand what the return on your investment as far as getting a customer and then getting them in and through the funnel would be. So those are your key metrics for our three examples today. Does anybody have any questions on the key metrics side? Any thoughts on your end? Oh, let me back up. So let's talk about our restaurant. Let's make sure we stick with that example as we go forward. So key metrics that we're gonna, obviously customers. I think that's number one, is our customers coming through the door. Depending on whether or not you have advertising or spending money advertising, you probably would want to look at least return on investment. So how much money are you putting out in advertising, and what is that doing to your overall customer rate and maybe your revenue side? And then probably revenue would be your next thing. Those three things would probably be the easiest starting point. There will also be some other metrics that will eventually probably creep in, like margin, food margin, things like that, waste. But those things will probably come down the road. Early on, and especially in this key metrics section, we want to make sure that we are really highlighting the things that move the needle and tell us whether or not we're being successful or not. And so in the restaurant world, I would say customers probably drive the majority of that, because you're not going to have situations, for the most part, in which people window shop the restaurant. They're going to either come in or not. And so you're going to be able to use that to track. Okay, now I will, Jack, fire away.
So I was just thinking about or I guess just a question, these seem pretty broad, the metrics, like you could define them a lot more. Is the point when you're filling out the lean canvas to be broad, or like when do you decide to be, more focused and actually have a tangible number behind your metric?
For sure. So the lean canvas, the way I coach and the way I'll talk through it will often be on the canvas itself. It's going to be really broad, because really what we're looking for is just those overall buckets that everything that really move the needle for the idea that we're working on. But let's say we take the canvas, and we'll talk a little bit about what like next steps look like. But let's say we're going to take the canvas. We've got an idea for a business pivot, and we're going to start going into implementation. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take those things and kind of define what those numbers are in a more specific way. So if I'm Amazon trying to create a bookstore, and so let's say website traffic, let's say this month we're shooting for 1,000 users to hit the site. That's what we're shooting for. My CAC, my customer acquisition cost, maybe I know that I'm going to spend $5,000, and I'm hoping that it brings me 1,000, not just website traffic, 1,000 actual customers. Then I'm hoping that my CAC will be should be $5 customer acquisition cost. So so then I'm hoping then from there that they will then spend more than that $5, because if they don't, I'm probably not going to be making any money. I'm just not going to be. And so their return on the investment needs to be higher than that. And so I'm going to be able to figure out those specific numbers as we move into the implementation side. This is meant more about this exercise around the lean canvas is meant more to set the expectations of where we're headed and have those high level ideas of what we're going to measure to determine our success. And then we'll go forward and actually define those things as we go forward. So that's where we'll head from there. And so as we move to the next step, which we're not really going to get into today, but as we talk about where we're headed, then we're going to start putting those finite or tangible numbers around those key metrics that we define we're going to create.
So how would you, I guess, make sure that you don't fall into that trap? I could see people falling in, which is their key metric is the most money, revenue, basically.
For sure. And so there are situations in which that's going to be a key metric, for sure. But it's often kind of the last piece of, I don't want to say the last piece of the puzzle, but there are often things that you can measure before that lead to the revenue piece. And so even if somebody that I'm working with, or if your company is looking at revenue as like the big key metric, there are still probably things in there that you can measure before that will be more of a what I would consider what I would call a leading indicator that revenue's coming. And that will be the stuff, because let's go back to our restaurant example for a second. Like the restaurant could put up their restaurant and we could define the key metric as revenue. And that would make total sense. No doubt about it. But if you really break that down, there is a huge amount of undefined and unmeasurable stuff in there, or I'm sorry, not unmeasurable, measurable stuff in between putting up my restaurant and opening for business and revenue that I can control that makes my likelihood of that revenue way higher. And so what we would start doing is start breaking it down. So how are we going to attract those customers? We know that the kind of food that we've established is one of those pieces, but we can't just throw the restaurant up and make that food and expect people to show up. So are we going to do social media advertising? Okay. How much is that going to cost? And what is our thought around how much is it going to drive business to our restaurant? And so there is going to be our place that we can measure. So we're going to measure our marketing budget versus how many customers it drives to the website. We might even in between that, we probably have impressions or clicks that we're going to be able to track. So we're going to be able to watch the funnel of, if I put out this much money in advertising, it gives me this many impressions, which got this many clicks, which then we did this much business this week, which gave me this revenue. And so all of those things in the middle are probably better metrics for us to be tracking, that we then can move the dial on to really start understanding how it affects the ultimate goal, which is revenue. Because the truth is, everybody here, Amazon, Facebook, Google, all of our small businesses, the only goal is revenue. Like, I don't care if you're a not-for-profit or if you're like, revenue is like, you still want to make the impact, but if you don't make revenue, none of us exist. But that's more of the end goal than where we can measure in between. And so what I would be working on is, what are those things that we can measure in between that indicate the success of where our revenue is going to end up, and that we can test, move, and understand the differences of, I spent $5,000 on Facebook this week, but I spent $5,000 on newspaper advertisement last week, and I actually had more customers. So my customer base is more focused in the newspaper than they are on Facebook. So it doesn't mean I'm going to abandon Facebook, but it may mean that I'm going to spend more money on newspaper advertising, because it seems like that when I do that, my revenue goes up. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that's not, but I do agree with you. It is really tempting to go straight to revenue, but revenue is more of the after effect than it is the thing that we can measure in between. There will be times that we'll talk about revenue, but it will not always be our key metric.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great question, Jack. Okay, gang. Are we ready to continue plowing right along? I'll take that as a yes. We're going to skip our 5 minutes because we're already 2 hours into this. You guys are amazing. This has been by far my favorite of my conversations. I'm so thankful you guys are chatting and asking questions and using the chat and all of that stuff. So next up, we're going to dive into unique value props. So this is going to be the center section, the same size as our problem section was in the lean canvas. Remember, lean canvas calls this unique value prop. Business model canvas calls this just value prop. To me, they're really the same. Unique, obviously, is trying to lean us toward what makes us unique. Hate to be Mr. Obvious there, but the exchange value between your business and your clients is really what it comes down to here. So your value proposition is, what are you offering your customers in value for them to be your client? And so it's really pretty self-explanatory. It's what you're selling. It's really, it boils down to as simple as that. And it's a little bit of what differentiates you from your competitors. Now, the one thing about the lean canvas that I think gets a little bit fuzzy is between the unique value prop here and the, oh my goodness, my brain just died on me. The section in which we're going to talk about kind of the differentiator, or what makes you, I forget the word right now. I'm really sorry. But their unique value prop is very similar to the section that we're going to talk about of what makes you kind of one of one, or makes you unfair advantage. There it was. Brain stopped work. But those two are very similar, but the value prop is a little bit more about what are you offering to your client, where the unfair advantage is kind of what makes you something that can't be knocked off by your competitors in the world. unique value prop still is what differentiates you a bit from your competitors. So like, let's think about Alta Vista versus Google. Alta Vista is going to be, like we already know that they're not as reliable as far as search results. You're going to sometimes get stuff that you weren't searching for. So the differentiator for Google might be that they're just going to be the best results, period. And they're going to have a way of doing that. And we'll get into that here in a second, but it's on the differentiation side from your competitors in a way that what you offer your customer is different than what they offer their customers, or what they offer the same customer. It's also how you're alleviating a pain point. So I often like to think about the problem and the solution and the value prop that we're offering in a way of like, what pain does our customer or our client feel in which we are solving for them? We are easing their pain. That is, I think, a valuable like lesson in the way I think about it, because it really makes me think about what is the thing that we're bringing to the table that the customer can't get from somebody else that really makes their lives better. I think all of us as entrepreneurs are looking to make lives better in the long run for folks, whether that's selling a product, selling a service, selling whatever we're doing. We're hoping to alleviate pain for our clients and make their lives better. And so this is one of those things that the unique value prop should be doing that. It's also kind of how you're fulfilling the needs of your customers. So, if they don't have a traditional pain point, but maybe they need something, your company is coming in and solving that, fulfilling that need for them, and making their life better that way. Also, just as a side point, if you're business to business. So a lot of us, a lot of the work that we do, we're B2C, so business to customer. So our business sells directly to the customer or to the end user of our product. That's the most common. But if you are a B2B, or if maybe your pivot that you're thinking about has a B2B angle to it, maybe you're going to take what you currently do as direct to consumer or business to consumer, and maybe you're going to add a new layer and help other businesses help their customers. Then your value prop may be actually helping somebody else achieve their value prop. Being aware of that, understanding what those things are, can be so beneficial when it comes to really understanding the value proposition that you're doing. And again, in the context of a business pivot, if we're moving to a B2B section of our company that we may have not done before, we may just be helping somebody else achieve their value prop to their customers. And that in turn becomes our new value prop for that idea. Here just like the problem section in the unique value prop, we also have a little section down towards the bottom that says high level concept. And so what we mean by high level concept is if you know of a comparable type of service or solution on the market, or something that's applicable, or even just I'm envisioning this kind of thing, this is a great place to jot it down. Again, our lean canvas is hopefully going to help us move toward implementation of the idea, pivot, or thing that we're working on. And so if you have that high level concept of what you're thinking this is going to look like, by writing that down here, it may be beneficial for those as you move down the path of implementation. They're going to have a better understanding of what your vision is, how you're envisioning this to work, and what you're going to do. So with that being said, let's dive into our 3 companies, and then we'll talk about the restaurant side. So unique value prop for Google. Users can find what they're looking for, unlike with competitors. So like we talked about, Alta Vista is not actually moving the needle because they get a bunch of search results that aren't right. So we're going to actually give our customers exactly what they search for. And our unique value prop is also a fast search. So we want to give them what they're looking for and do it as quickly as possible. So people are really happy with that. And their high level concept that they listed here to help kind of drive people forward is we want to be a fast web search based on the relevancy of web pages. So this gives you an idea of the fast shows up again. And then we also want to order them in the relevancy of the web page. It's just going to make sure that folks understand as they go to implement, like if we're going to have to develop this technology, these are the things that it should prioritize and how it should do what it does. For Facebook, so the unique value prop was Harvard students-oriented communication platform. So it's a Harvard students-oriented communication platform. And then they put in parentheses here that they had already had the vision that this would go to other colleges, even though this was originally intended just for Harvard students. And so as folks that grew up, as Facebook grew up, this is exactly how it rolled out. I remember a day when you only could get on Facebook if you had a .edu email address. It was only meant for college students, and that's where it started out. Their high-level concept then that they outlined was Friendster for college students. So they took what was already out there in the market. In fact, we called Friendster out on that problem slide in our examples of folks that were already in the market, but we called out that this was going to be like that for college students. So again, somebody external that wasn't thinking about this way could see this and go, okay, I know what Friendster is at the time, but it's going to be just for college students. Makes sense. I know what the vision is. Amazon's unique value prop was to buy books using a PC from home or office without visiting several local stores to find a particular book. So the unique value prop was one-stop shop to buy online from the comfort of my own home or office, the book that I'm looking for. Seems really simple, but then they go into the high-level concept is to become Earth's biggest bookstore. And it was actually became the company's original tagline. So these things, again, give our unique value proposition for our customer, but then the high-level concept allows us to put into terms in which somebody could understand the concept of, okay, I get it. The value prop is what we're providing to our customers, and the high-level concept tells us kind of like, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to be? And do it in terms that people can understand, even if they're from outside the company. All right, gang, we're cruising right along. Oh, restaurant. Okay, so let's think back to our restaurant example. So we've got the restaurant. We're going to create a Southern food restaurant that is in our area. So what's our unique value proposition? Is our unique value proposition would be to provide a specific cuisine to folks that want that cuisine, or to help them experience a new cuisine that's not in the area. And so that would be I would probably put 2 unique value props, because we've got one customer that's likely a Southern cuisine lover that is just looking for that restaurant, and then the other one is to help people experience something different. And then high-level concept, I probably would call out a popular Southern cuisine restaurant for our area. So this is where my off-the-cuff example is falling apart because I can't think of one off the top of my head. But I would go search, and if I was making the restaurant, I probably would have an idea of the kind of food that I was looking for. And so then I would take that and I would say, this restaurant in our area. I think it would make sense. I think people would understand what I was trying to shoot for and where I was headed. All right, gang. That's the end of the value props section. Getting ready to move on again. Any questions on the stuff that we've gone over up to this point? Any other thoughts or things that we can discuss from your end? Jack, you got it, buddy.
Yeah, so one challenge that I'm kind of having distinguishing unique value proposition and solution. I feel like those two can, I don't know, you can easily basically copy and paste whatever you put in the solution into UVP. I guess, how do you make sure that the unique value proposition, I guess, is unique in its own right?
So, another great question. So the one thing I tend to try to do is I try to make the solution as plainly connected to the problem as possible. So like with Amazon, users don't have a one-stop shop to find books and can't do it online. So my solution is literally online bookstore. Like, it's as plain as simple as it gets. And then when I get to value prop, I actually can open it up a little bit more. So what they do here, buy books using a PC from home office without visiting several local bookstores to find a particular book. So what I'm doing is I'm taking online bookstore and I'm explaining in more detail what, like, we don't just want to be an online bookstore, because that doesn't really cover it. We did cover the million books with millions of books in there, but for the most part, we didn't cover that. Like, the value prop for the customer isn't that we are just an online bookstore. It's that they can buy the books that they're looking for that currently takes them to multiple stores to try to find, and they have to guess, and they're going to be able to get that all within one spot. And so when I'm working through these, often we want to, and this is why the solution slide or the solution box is so small, is meant to keep us from getting into the unique value prop information there. We want to be really targeted and really simple in the solution slide or on the solution box. And then we move into giving the more detail of, the buying books using their personal computer from their home and office without visiting several bookstores. That whole unique value prop, you're 100% right, could go into the solution side. But we specifically want to try to break them out because we want to help have a clean understanding of what makes that online bookstore with millions of books so unique for our customer base. And so this is unique value prop is in that offer, it stands alone in our offering section of this, because we really want to narrow down to what about what we're doing makes it so needed by our customer. And so that's where I would differentiate the two. It does take a little bit of you often, the biggest thing that I find when I'm doing lean canvassing or business model canvassing is that solution slide. Entrepreneurs want to write you a book of the solution they're going to get. And so trying to really hone down to, no, just give me one quick sentence that goes right back to the problem of what the solution is. And then here's where we can actually kind of expound a little bit more on, what makes what we're going to do so special and why are people going to want to use it? Great question.
Thank you.
Any other questions, gang, before we continue right along? Okay, we're going to keep rolling because even though I've got these all to give us breaks, I think we're quickly running out of time. So let's hop into customer segments. Let's keep plugging right along. So customer segments, it's far right side of the business model canvas, and it's also another big. So you'll notice that we just skipped over 2 of the smaller boxes in order to go to customer segments. There's a specific reason for that, because customer segments for us flows really nicely in from the unique value prop and where we've been. So we're going to go skip over to the far right-hand side. And so here we really want to understand who are our target customers. So this could be demographic. This could be geographic. This could be a whole slew of things. but we want to understand like the different segments of customers that we're trying to attract. One thing that, especially when it comes to regards to business pivots, is that we may be pivoting toward a new customer or a different customer than we traditionally have. We want to be sensitive to that. We'll talk about that in a second. But, well, that's duplicated. Great work, guy who made the slide deck. But anyways, who are we trying to achieve? And so this may be a specific customer. This may be, we often try to, especially when it comes to working with early stage companies or headed toward understanding our strategy to really getting to our customers, we try to break it down to as many buckets and as small of a bucket as we can get. So we want to start very targeted with our customer segments, knowing that we can expand to other markets or other customers as we go. Who are the people that will value my value prop is another way of thinking about this. And I think it's really valuable to kind of think through all of those things. Are there people that I'm not even thinking about targeting, but may find value in this and may want to do this or buy this new product or new service that I'm doing? Again, I alluded to this a second ago, but is your pivot changing your core customer segment or adding to? Why I say be aware of that and adjust as needed is, let's say I've got an idea of, developing some new product line or new product as a whole, but it isn't really meant for the people that I normally sell my product to. Well, you want to be really careful that, for one, you don't alienate your current customer base, but also you need to know that if you're going to go just advertise your new product to the existing customer base, you're probably wasting your money and time and effort. And so you need to understand the differences between the new customer base and the old customer base, and be able to either segment or attract each in their own way, so you make sure that you're getting a good return on your investment as far as your time, energy, and capital that you're outlaying to attract those customers, but also making sure that you're not setting yourself up for disappointment. So if you're coming out with a new product idea that is going to attract a new customer, and you spend all your money trying to advertise your new product to your old customer base, your new product may fail, but it may not be because it's not a good product or not a good idea or not a good pivot. It may be that you're not identifying the right customer segment for the idea, and you're not going out and getting them. Also, we are always looking for early adopters. So at the bottom of the customer segments, just like the other two big ones, we have an early adopters section. This is the people that are going to be the easiest to bring on board with the least amount of work. So let's say that, we'll talk about the other examples, but let's say our restaurant that we know we're laying out, we're going to go try to attract people that used to live in the southern states where my high level idea of the company comes from. So I'm going to find folks that in my advertising with Facebook and things like this, we're able to be really targeted. We can go out and find folks that used to live in, Georgia, South Carolina, and have moved to my area. They're an early adopter likely because they already have experience with restaurants like mine. So I want to know who those people are, because I can attract them into my restaurant with the lowest barrier to entry, and I can really bring them on, and they might be my early adopter that can then go spread the word for me, and then word of mouth can happen. So be aware of those things. So here are our three examples. We've got our customer segments for all three. So for Google, that customer segment is going to be all web users. But our early adopters, the people we know are going to be the early users, and we're going to roll it out specifically to, are going to be Stanford students. So Google's engineer group all had connections with Stanford. It was a no-brainer that they would be able to use it and be able to give feedback and really start on it. And so this was a great place. Now, I will give you this caveat right off the bat. If I was sitting in the room back in the 90s talking with Google, I probably would have pushed back on their customer segment being all web users. I have to say this is one of the things that it eventually is true that all web users are using Google, or a lot of them, but I would have made them, we would have worked to become even more targeted than that. Just because I think all web users is so broad and so difficult to like really get a handle on that it makes it really difficult to kind of be targeted as you go forward. Facebook on its own, customer segments, this one I think is spot on in the kind of targeting that we would want to do for our customer segments. So college students and students of other colleges and universities. So really this probably should have initially said Harvard, or no, the earlier adopters are our Harvard university students. But this is where we kind of break down and can get more granular, and then it would expand out into something bigger. Amazon, again, I don't love book readers, though they obviously are their customer base, but I probably would have leaned more toward like at least having additional customer segments of maybe book readers, and then maybe I would have been like, rare book enthusiasts or people that are looking for, like, I want my customer segment, I've already kind of defined as I've gone through this segment of people that are going to multiple bookshops to try to find a specific book. Like that to me is a customer segment that I should obviously be focused on. Now they call them out as an early adopter. And obviously that proved to be true, but I think I would have still bucketed them out earlier in the customer segments to make sure that I was really attracting them, though they also fit into that earlier adopter stuff. So back to our restaurant, we kind of already touched on that, but again, restaurant, our customer segment would be, folks that are going to restaurants in our area. I would also say that early adopters would be folks that have either moved from the South or have they want to find that kind of cuisine in their local area. Any questions here before I want to make sure you guys have time for some lunch here. I know you guys have been troopers sticking with me for 2.5 hours here. So these last couple, we're going to go really quick. They're pretty simple. So channels. This is literally how do you sell to your customers? This can be specific on those channels that you're using, or it can be more generalized like I've got the examples here. So in-person, online, inbound versus outbound. So this is something that, are we calling people to sell our product, or are they calling us? Are we selling online? Do we have a brick and mortar shop? We might have multiples. And so being sensitive to knowing how do you sell or get to your customers is really important. This is less also, though you can call out marketing here. I tend to use the channels more on how do you sell versus how do you contact your customer. There's no right or wrong answer here, but I'm always trying to focus more on the how do we get from customer to or from not customer to customer, which is typically the sales cycle. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for here. One thing that this is more of a rhetorical question when you're going through this, but are those channels fast, efficient, and cost effective? If we are a brick and mortar shop and we don't have an online presence to supplement, and we're thinking about doing that, that's great. But we also need to make sure that there is a level of expectation that I think the customer in the world that has experience with online shopping has an expectation of. So we need to make sure that when we're launching something like maybe our first ever online store, we need to make sure that we're using something that gives the customer the experience that they expect across the board. No, you don't have to be Amazon or Google or those kinds of things, but those companies have set an expectation for customers that if you are so far off of what they do or the standard they set, you may lose customers if you're not able to do that. And so we've got great platforms today that are kind of all in the box, that are already pre-made, that you can just bolt on to your website or what you're doing. It may not be your long-term goal to do that, but in the short term, it at least gets you up and running in a way that your customers will have an experience that they're familiar with. And it's smart to kind of follow that example of what's out there in the market. So here's some channels for the three big companies that we've got. So user references are going to be the big channels for Google. If you think back to when Google started, there really wasn't online advertising. There wasn't the way for them to get the word out. So they relied heavily on using that, especially like the Stanford base, and starting there and getting those folks to use it, love it. And then they became their kind of advertising team, telling other people, hey, have you tried Google? Have you done this? Go do that. And then it quickly spiraled from there and grew. Channels for Facebook, referrals again among Harvard students. So they brought it out to the Harvard student community. It was the right thing at the right time. Everybody started talking about it and moving together. And then from there, it grew because the Harvard students had friends that went to other colleges. And so they started talking about the Facebook, and all of those things began to create word of mouth wildfire. Then once they permeated the education system, they grew from there. And then Amazon, the channels, affiliates and resellers. So not only did Amazon have those affiliates that could recommend folks to go buy from them or could plug in and allow people to buy through them, but they also allowed resellers to hop on and sell their product through those channels. So Amazon didn't have to have all the stock and all of that stuff. They were able to leverage the already out there book market and make it something that completed all of the questions and solved the problem for their users, and also helped solve a problem for booksellers in general that didn't have an online presence yet. So that's the channel section. Any questions, any thoughts there before we move on? Okay. Unfair advantage. So this one is typically the squishiest of all of the ones that you're going to work on as you go through the business model canvas. But what's the one thing that you're doing that can't be easily copied? This is, again, you'll see why this slightly ties into the unique value prop, but also should be a little bit different, because what we're looking for here is kind of how does the business itself, what we're trying to do, or the idea that we're trying to solve, how does it kind of have its own unique thing that is not easily fixed or easily copied by other people. We talk a lot with the startups and the entrepreneurs that I work with on what creates a moat or barrier to entry for a competitor. So you need to understand kind of what makes you one of one. So what makes you or your business unique and hard for other people to do, because you either have maybe the expertise or the experience or know the pain that you're solving in an intimate way. Like those are things that make you special and unique for your organization and can create an unfair advantage for your business or your pivot versus somebody else trying to do the same thing. One thing we often worry about as entrepreneurs that is often not something that comes to fruition is like what if somebody copies my idea? What if we talk to hundreds upon hundreds of companies and startups and entrepreneurs a month. And oftentimes people are like, hey, do you ever sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements? And the answer is no. The reason we don't is because if I did, I'd never be able to talk to anybody ever again. And two is that most companies, they have this one thing. You've got a reason that your company is special, that somebody, even if they did steal your idea, could not execute like you can, because you know this for a reason that makes it specific to you. And so what are those things that allow you to create an unfair advantage in the marketplace to give you the leg up to be successful in the long run? I always say this, I really hate it. I'm always going to push folks that I work with on this, but this box can potentially be blank, especially early on. But there is, with everybody, a reason that you have an unfair advantage. And so you may early on not know what that reason is, may not quite have that unfair advantage thing, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be sensitive or be thinking about what it is, because that's the difference. Like, what is let's think back to Juliana's example of the insurance person. Okay. There's hundreds of insurance agents in each area. What makes somebody unique to that? Maybe you're an insurance agent that's also a musician. So maybe in the area that there aren't people that specialize in musical instrument insurance or whatever. That could give you your musical ability or talent could give you an unfair advantage in your business, because you could be known as the musician's insurance guy, and you might do all the other things that everybody else does, but because you have the unfair advantage of being a musician, maybe you have that thing that differentiates your business in the long run and helps you be that sought after expert in that field. And so, though you may leave it blank, I would highly recommend that you don't, at least not for long. And so unfair advantage for Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Unfair advantage for Google was innovation. So they had very early on, they wanted the page rank technology. They had already talked about it in the solution and the unfair advantage section, that they wanted to make sure that they were capturing relevancy to what was being searched. And so their technology allowed them to create an unfair advantage overall because they had the innovation. Facebook's unfair advantage was person-to-person interaction, that they knew that people needed that, wanted that. They wanted friends activities to push to other friends in there to use the network. So they were going to leverage those original users to grow their market share, to expand the company. And then invention of the new website type. So the social network with social features. So, messaging. If you remember back in the day, we used to poke. And so, Jack, I missed your question. I'm really sorry. I'll go back to that here in a second. But those inventions of new social network features really made a huge difference as a whole to something that created that unfair advantage for Facebook at the time. Amazon's unfair advantage was lower price. So they had less employees, less rent, less overhead. And so because they had less of that traditional cost center stuff for a bookstore, they were able to offer the lowest price on books. And really, at the time, they also had no competition for online booksellers. So that was one of the things that really set them all apart. Each one of them had their own unique thing, but that's where they started at the beginning to make sure that they had that unfair advantages across the board. I'm going to pause for a second. That's the end of the unfair advantage section. I want to go back to really quickly the channel side. So Jack had a question around the inbound, outbound channels really quick. And so I just want to make sure that I covered this. So really it comes down to how are you connecting or making sales with your clientele. So inbound would mean that, like, let's take, well, I mean, Amazon's probably a great example. Most all Amazon stuff is going to be somebody going to Amazon, searching for something or hunting for something and then purchasing it. That is inbound sales. If you're also, like I would say most like websites, things like that are typically inbound. They're not calling customers and trying to sell them on things. They're just waiting for the customer to want to buy their product and going to the website to buy. Outbound is kind of the opposite. So oftentimes you see this on like the wholesale side more often than not, but I'll give you a great example of an Indiana company, Sweetwater Sound. I mean, if you guys haven't figured this out yet, I'm a musician yet. So Sweetwater is a great example of a majorly inbound company. They sell musical instruments online. They also have a store presence, and you can literally go there when you're ready to buy something and go buy it. But they also have a great sales team within the company, and they occasionally actually call the former customers or email former customers and say, hey, wanted to reach out, we're running this sale, or hey, wanted to reach out and see if there's anything you needed. That is outbound sales, in which they actually are going to their customers and saying, hey, do you want to buy? And so there's a difference in those two. Typically that we're more familiar with the inbound model than outbound, but that's the difference between the two. All right, gang, we're rounding the corner. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this. This has been a great session here. So the last two are going to be around the finance thing. And this is going to be, again, back to a question that Jack asked earlier. This is going to be high level stuff, not diving into the actual numbers of this stuff. So first is cost structure. So this is going to be all the costs that go into operating the business. This is going to factor in, especially if you're a product company, the cost of goods sold. So we talked about that a little bit earlier, but COGS versus additional business costs as well. So one thing to be aware of, especially if you're making a pivot or changing your business model, are your costs going to increase or decrease because of the pivot? Maybe your pivot is selling the same product you've got to a different market. Maybe you're going B2B. Maybe that means you can buy more so your costs go down. Or are you developing a new product that has increased mold costs and you have to do other things? And so are your costs going to increase as a result of the decisions that you're making? You also need to cover, this is a hard one, especially for us entrepreneurs, to cover your time allocation in your overall costs. So, you know, you may be a sole proprietor, a sole founder, but your time's valuable. And so you need to understand that even though you may be the person doing the work or doing the coding or whatever it may be, there's still cost associated with that, even if you're not charging the business for it. And so understanding that, knowing what legal and insurance and salary and benefits go into your cost structure are really important. Not everybody's going to be the same across the board. You may not have benefits. You may, hopefully we all have insurance. You may not need legal at the current moment, but understanding that if you're going to make a switch or if you're going to do something that requires IP protection, you need to factor those things into the decisions that you're making for your business. Sorry about the switch, because cost structure and revenue source streams are at the bottom of this thing. So I tried to make them as easy as possible. But when looking at our three big companies here, Google cost structure is going to be around hosting the website and then development. So they have wrapped kind of payroll into their development costs here, but they probably should have a third of payroll on there for the overall cost structure for their company. For Facebook, again, hosting and development are going to be there. They've got payroll as well. And that's what it's going to take for them to get to market and get their idea rolled out. And then Amazon is probably the most developed here. So they know they're going to have hosting and website development costs for them, but then there's also going to be operational costs. So they're going to have rent. They're going to have a facility where they have to store things. They're going to have storage and facility costs. They're going to have delivery costs. All of those things go into the operational costs. And they're not manufacturing a product, so they don't have COGS, which is cost of goods sold, but they have those operational costs that are there. And then finally, payroll. And so again, these are high-level things that you should be aware of, but especially when it comes to working on pivots and things like that, we need to be sensitive to making sure that we know all of the costs that are going to go into making the pivot or developing the new product that we're working on. Any questions here before we get to the last section? All right, guys, you're doing great. So the final thing, revenue streams. The way your company converts your value proposition that we outlined earlier into financial gain. It comes down to like, how do you price your product or solution? Understanding if you're competitive with competitors. We're not going to get into the dollar amount. Again, like I said, all of this is going to be high level. You'll take this and then move into the more specifics as you go. But you do need to understand that, like, with the costs that we've got into this business pivot, if we can't be competitive with what other folks are in the market at, we may not actually have something that's viable. And so understanding those revenue streams is really important. Also understanding what type of revenue model do you have. So are you pay per product? That's what a lot of us do. I have a product, somebody buys it once, they pay every time they buy the product. But you might have a subscription model, or maybe you're developing a new subscription model. That is a different type of revenue. It can be recurring, and so therefore you know that you're going to have X amount of money coming in every month. It can also be fee for service, and there's a couple other revenue models that are out there. But understanding those things is really important to understanding how we're going to bring money into the company. And so for Google, our revenue streams are investment dollars. So we can get money into the company by somebody investing in our company. But also we're going to make money by advertising revenue. And we knew that very early on. That was the thought that they had when they were building out the platform. And so those were their two major streams of revenue. Facebook is exactly the same. So they brought money into the company either through investment into the company or advertising revenue. And then the last one, revenue streams for Amazon, was direct sales. Like, that's how they made their money. That's how they continue to make their money, is they have product for sale and they sell it to their customer. So with that being said, we have 14 minutes left. We're going to get done here just a little bit early. So where do you all go from here? Now that we've walked through all of the parts of the business model canvas, what's next? What the heck are we going to do? So there's a couple different options. First, some will take their ideas that they've worked on either today or over the next little bit, and they're going to be able to go straight from business model canvassing. They'll probably need to get some of the specific numbers around, their costs and what it's going to take, what are they going to price their product at. But they may be able to go straight from business model canvassing and with relative ease move straight into testing the business pivot or the new business idea. Making sure that they've got things like their key metrics ready to roll, everything like that. Really simple, but they may be able to just go and start testing. And so that's one option that they've got. Others will want to take what we've learned today and kind of drilled in on and start the exercise over in a more targeted manner. So maybe now that we've gotten through all of this, maybe you've come up with an even more targeted problem that you want to try to build a solution for. I've seen folks do this exercise because it can be so quickly done 2 or 3 times before they really figure out, okay, what am I going to go test? Some also may want to allow other teammates in the company to do their own version. One of the things that I've done in the past with either co-founders or small teams that I've got is I'll actually have each one of them try to tackle a problem. They may They may all start with the same problem. They may all just have a blank canvas and say, hey, let's go just identify a problem that you think our customer has, and let's go try to do it. Those are really interesting ways to kind of spark new innovative ideas, but also get different perspectives from your business on what do people see as the problem? What are the people, your customer service team, if you've got one, may have a different viewpoint than maybe your fulfillment team. And so being able to dive into those things and really understand from different points of view can spark new innovative ideas and may even bring in new pivot opportunities for everybody and as a whole. But the most important thing is that you take this business canvas, the lean or the traditional business model canvas, and you go through this exercise and then you move toward action. So the faster you can get a hypothesis that you're going to go try to test, the better, because that's going to give you more learnings and help drive the business forward as a whole. But at the end of the day, I hope this lean canvas has made you guys, for one, I hope you leave with a clear idea of how to use it. Understand it can be used in so many different ways, and there's no right or wrong way to use it. I think that the most important thing is that you use it to help affirm and think through the things that need to happen in order to make decisions for your business, help others make decisions for their businesses. And, I just thank you guys all for being here today. At the end of the day, we're all finished with the presentation as a whole, but I also want to encourage anybody on this call, if you're working through something like that, if anything like that, please feel free. I'm going to put in the chat my email address. If there's anything I can support you on, be a resource for, or even just be somebody that you can bounce ideas off of, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to do that. I've really enjoyed getting to chat today. I thank you guys for being so interactive. I'm really excited that it went like it did, and I hope this has impacted you all. So with that, if there's any questions, fire away. And if not, I'll let you all head off to finish your Friday, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.